He kissed her wrist, then disappeared. They say the desert takes what you don't guard: water, horses, and hearts. That evening, the wind came howling across the flats like a drunk preacher with the devil on his heels, driving red dust through every crack in the last stop saloon. I was trimming wicks, counting bottles, bracing for another night of drifters and trouble. My hands shook as I worked, not from the cold, but from something I couldn't name, a restlessness that had been growing in me for months. We were packed tonight. The main room swelled with tobacco smoke and voices, poker games, whiskey breath, a baby fussing upstairs where the traveling families bedded down. The potbelly stove belched smoke, and Papa, who was already 3 sheets to the wind, cursed it with the same bone-deep weariness he used for me and everything else. I moved through the crowd with a tray of beans and hardtack, dodging spurs and grabbing hands. The cattle drivers by the bar were rowdy, 5 men, trail dusty, faces burned red by the sun. Someone caught my wrist as I passed, and my stomach clenched with familiar dread. "Soft hands for a saloon girl, Rosa," drawled Buck Henley, a drover from the Chisholm Trail. His grip tightened, fingers sliding toward my hip with clear intent. My skin crawled, but I kept my face blank. I pulled away. "Stop for every fool in a frontier saloon. You'll never see the sunrise." That's what Ma used to say, back when she was alive, to say anything at all. He followed me, reaching again. Bolder this time. "How about a kiss for old Buck?" My throat tightened. I was so tired of this, so tired of being grabbed and leered at and treated like something to be owned. Let her go. This didn't come from me. A tall man stood silhouetted in the door, dust swirling around his boots. Something in my chest fluttered. Hope, maybe, or that anyone would speak up for me. Sand peppered his black duster, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He stepped forward, spurs chiming softly against the plank floor, leaving a trail of desert grit. "I said," he repeated, voice quiet but carrying a steel that made my pulse quicken. "Let her go." Scowling, Buck's hand dropped. "Didn't know she had a protector." "I'm not her protector," the stranger said, and I felt a strange pang of disappointment. But I don't cotton to men who can't keep their hands to themselves. The saloon went quiet. Cards stopped shuffling. Someone spat into a brass spittoon. I could feel every eye in the room on us, and my cheeks burned. I stepped in quickly. "It's fine." He was leaving. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Buck laughed it off, muttered something about uppity women, and turned back to his whiskey. But I caught the way his eyes lingered on me, calculating, hungry, and a shiver ran down my spine. The tall man pushed back his hat then, and I saw his face properly. Deep blue eyes, sharp and tired, set deep beneath dark brows. Something about those eyes made my breath catch, like they'd seen too much, felt too much. Dust clung to his jaw where stubble caught the lamplight. Clean features, composed. The kind of face that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. When his gaze met mine, my heart faltered. There was kindness there, but also a deep sadness that called to something in my own bruised soul. "Got a room?" he asked, and his voice was gentler now, meant just for me. Caught between stations outside Tucson. I looked at him properly. His boots were good leather, scuffed but well made. His gun belt sat easy on his hips, the holster worn smooth. Beneath the duster, a clean white shirt and black vest. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being listened to, but there was something deliberate in how he kept to the shadows. something that made me think he understood what it felt like to hide. "Rooms are all taken," I said, my voice catching slightly. "But there's a cot in the back room. If you don't mind sharing space with grain sacks, that'll do." His jaw tightened slightly. A man unused to making do, maybe. But he didn't complain, and something about that made my chest warm. Pa grunted from his chair by the stove. "Stage lines washed out at Phoenix. Half the territory's been riding through here. Won't find peace tonight, stranger." The man didn't answer. He peeled off his coat and hung it on a peg by the door. The leather saddlebags across his shoulder were weather-beaten, but expensive. Not a cowpoke's gear. Something about him felt carefully hidden, like a man running from more than just the weather. Like me, I thought, always running from Pa's fists and the endless, grinding loneliness of this place. He took a table in the corner where the oil lamp flickered and the wind whistled through gaps in the walls. I brought him coffee without being asked, my hands trembling slightly as I set it down. He accepted it with a nod, long fingers wrapping around the tin cup, hands that held reins, not plows, gentle hands. "Much obliged," he said. His voice was now smoother and more educated. Each word was measured, like he was used to choosing them carefully. It made me wonder what he was hiding from. "You're not from Arizona territory," I said, lingering beside his table longer than I should have. "No. Just passing through?" I asked. "Seems that way." But something in his eyes said he wasn't sure about that anymore. I hovered, not sure why. Maybe it was how he sat so still in a room full of restless men. Or perhaps it was the loneliness I saw in him that matched my own. The letter he pulled from his vest pocket was folded carefully, and the paper was good quality, sealed with black wax. I saw an official-looking crest that I didn't recognize. His eyes scanned it, and I noticed something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. Then he folded it again, not hasty, just private. "I'll bring supper when it's ready," I said, stepping back reluctantly. "No hurry," he replied, looking up at me with those deep blue eyes. "It's cooler in here than out there." It wasn't. The desert heat clung to everything, and the stove made it worse. But something in his voice was calm, unreadable. It made the dusty saloon feel like a sanctuary, made me feel less alone than I had in months. I moved on, tray in hand, pulse beating harder than it should. Behind me, the stranger sat like he'd been carved from the desert wind. A man who didn't belong in a place like this, but had somehow found his way to its heart and decided to stay. And, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I found myself hoping morning wouldn't come too soon. The saloon emptied slowly, boots scraping across sand-gritty floors. The wind hadn't died. It had settled into a steady, spiteful moan that made the whole building creak like old bones. Like my heart, I thought. Always aching. Always on the verge of breaking. A few men stumbled upstairs to the shared bunks, voices thick with drink. Pa had long since passed out in his chair, leaving behind his boots, a trail of tobacco ash, and the sour smell of broken dreams. The saloon reeked of sweat and smoke. The last stop wasn't much. Low-beamed ceilings that'd crack your skull if you stood too tall. Warped floorboards that squeaked with every step. Cattle horns mounted above the bar, and a faded painting of some long-dead president watching over it all with hollow eyes. But it was ours. Or what passed for ours in a world that seemed determined to take everything away. I ladled beans into a bowl and brought them to the stranger, still seated in his corner. My hands were steadier now, but my heart wasn't. He looked different in the lamplight, less guarded, vulnerable somehow. His sleeves were rolled up, showing strong forearms marked with old scars. Not fresh cuts, but the kind that came from years of living hard, from surviving things that should have broken him. A small leather journal lay open on the table, filled with careful sketches. I caught a glimpse of a landscape with rock formations and what looked like a woman's profile. My breath caught. "You run this place alone?" he asked. There was something in his voice, an understanding maybe, like he knew what it meant to carry too much weight. "Mostly, Pa helps when he's sober enough to stand," which wasn't often, I didn't add, but he seemed to hear it anyway. He nodded. "Your mother?" "Died of fever 3 winters back." The words still hurt to say. Ma had been the only one who understood me, who saw past the dust and drudgery to the dreams I kept locked in my heart. That was enough. He didn't push, and I was grateful for his silence. I sat down across from him. Not close, but not far. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the moment feel like something from a dream. He watched me with quiet attention, not the way most men did, measuring, wanting, taking. This was different, like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, but wanted to understand. "Seems wrong to keep calling you stranger," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled slightly, and it transformed his whole face. "Daniel Thorne." "Rosa," I replied, and the way he repeated my name made it sound like music. He nodded slowly. "Suits you." "And you don't sit like a cowboy," I said, testing the waters between us. He let out a soft laugh that warmed something profound in my chest. My father would agree, said I was born with too much book learning and not enough sense. He wanted me to get into politics back in Richmond. I wanted open skies. "So, you ran?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, born from my desperate desire to escape. I delayed, found the edge of civilization, and lingered. His eyes found mine. "What about you? Ever think about running?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Every day," I whispered, then immediately regretted the honesty, but he just nodded like he understood. "It's harder than it looks." We sat quietly for a while, the silence comfortable in a way I'd never experienced. Then a gust rattled the windows, and I stood, reluctant to break whatever spell had settled between us. The night wore on, and the last straggler left. Only Daniel remained, sitting quietly, his eyes in faraway places that looked suspiciously like the ache in my own heart. "I should show you the back room," I said, my voice catching slightly. He rose and followed me, and I was acutely aware of him behind me, his presence, his warmth, and the way he moved like a man comfortable in his skin. The room was small, and it was the only place I could sleep when we were full. It was barely more than a closet with a cot, a washstand, and sacks of grain stacked against the walls. A single window looked out on the desert where stars burned like scattered diamonds, like the hope that had been flickering in my chest all evening. "There's just the cot," I told him, suddenly trembling. He glanced around. The room was cramped but clean, cooler than the main saloon, with thick walls that muffled the wind. And somehow, in this small space, the air between us felt charged, electric. "I'll sleep in the saloon," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "No need. I'm used to hard ground. It'll be a rare pleasure to have shelter tonight. We can share. There's no lock on the door." The words came out before I thought them through. I trust you, I added, surprised to find I meant it. When was the last time I trusted anyone? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise or gratitude. Thank you, he said softly. That means more than you know. We undressed only enough to shed our boots and outer clothes, him pulling off his vest and gun belt, me loosening my corset stays. No ceremony, no staring, just the quiet understanding of two people too tired for anything but rest. But I was achingly aware of every movement, every breath. We lay side by side on the narrow cot, the mattress sagging toward the middle. I could feel his warmth. Not touching, but close enough that my skin prickled with awareness. Through the window came the sound of wind and the distant howl of coyotes, like the loneliness howling in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, every nerve alive. My hands clenched and unclenched beneath the rough blanket. I was wide awake, caught between fear and longing for something I couldn't name, for connection, for someone to see me, for this feeling of not being alone. He shifted, and I heard it, the way his breath caught when he moved on his left shoulder. You're hurt. The words came out softly. He didn't answer, just breathed out slowly through his nose. Sagebrush, he said quietly. What? Your hair smells like sagebrush and desert rain. His voice was rough with something I couldn't identify. My heart fluttered. My mother's soap recipe. I make it with lye and what little I can gather. Does it help? Help what? Make this place feel like home. I turned toward him, and in the lamplight, I could see the vulnerability in his face. Shadows softened his profile, but I could see the line of his jaw, the hollow beneath his cheekbone. A man worn down by running. Does it scare you? I whispered. Which part? The running, the not knowing where you belong. I could feel his eyes on me in the dark. Every day. His hand found mine beneath the blanket, not claiming, not demanding, just offering, like he was saying, you're not alone. I see you, I understand. I didn't pull away, couldn't. This moment felt too precious, too fragile. Sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled and I felt everything. The warmth of his skin, the ache in my chest, the trembling in my fingers, the desperate hope that this wasn't just a dream. He turned toward me, and my breath caught as he leaned closer. His fingers traced the air between my mouth and my face like he was memorizing me. For a heartbeat, I thought he might kiss me, but he didn't. Instead, he lifted my hand, fingers gentle around my wrist. He brought it to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my pulse point. Not hurried, but lingering, reverent. Like I mattered. Like I was worth something. Fire seared from that single touch, spreading through me like desert lightning. I couldn't breathe for the tenderness of it. My fingers curled involuntarily, trying to hold on to the feeling and trying to hold on to him. He let go gently, and I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I let it out with a soft gasp. All I knew was that something in my chest had grown wings. I knew then that no matter what name he'd given or what life he'd returned to, he had changed something in me that would never be the same. He'd seen me, and for the first time in my life, I felt beautiful. The heat of his lips lingered on my skin long after he'd pulled away. I pressed my hand to my heart and closed my eyes, not from shame, but from wonder, because with that single gentle kiss, he'd awakened a hope I'd never dared to dream. In the quiet of that room, as the desert wind sang its lonely song, I knew I'd dream of him, not with sin or scandal, but with yearning, with love. Please, Don't let morning come. When I awoke to the scent of leather and dust, he was gone. The emptiness hit me like a physical blow. The lamp had burned down to nothing. His side of the cot was cold. A draft from the window had crept under the blanket, and for a moment I wondered if I'd dreamed it all. If that perfect, tender moment had been nothing but wishful thinking. But the hollow was there. His shape still pressed into the thin mattress, and a single thread from his white shirt clung to the pillow. I picked it up with trembling fingers, holding it like a lifeline. I sat up slowly, heart too heavy for words, too heavy for breath. My hands ached from holding on to nothing, from losing the first good thing that had happened to me in years. Downstairs, the saloon was empty. No voices, no crackling fire. I checked the stable out back, though I already knew. His horse was gone, and the morning wind had already erased his tracks from the sand like he'd never existed at all. Back in the room, I found what he'd left. Tucked under the water pitcher on the washstand was a sketch, not folded, not signed, just charcoal on good paper. The view from the window looking out across the desert. The twisted mesquite, the sagging roofline, even the crooked last stop saloon sign, all captured in sure, confident strokes by someone who saw everything, even when pretending not to look. Someone who saw beauty in this desolate place. Someone who saw beauty in me. I ran my fingers over my name he's printed in the bottom corner. The quick but careful strokes. Were they a memory or a promise? Or maybe just goodbye? The tears I'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. I folded the drawing and tucked it inside my chemise. A foolish, romantic thing to do. But it stayed there, close to my heart, like a secret I couldn't bear to lose. Like proof that it had all been real. A week later, the mail rider came through. Old Pete Morrison on his dust-covered mare, saddlebags bulging with letters and packages. "Got something for you, Miss Rosa." My heart stopped. The envelope was travel-stained but intact. My name written in firm, slanted script. Daniel's handwriting. I took it with shaking hands, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there in the dust. Figured I'd tear it open right then, but instead I tucked it away beside the sketch. Not from pride, not quite fear, just certainty. Whatever it said would end something, and I wasn't ready for endings when everything still felt unfinished, when my heart was still bleeding from his absence. So I carried it with me, through serving drinks, through sweeping floors, through evenings staring out at a desert that looked different now, empty, like it was missing something essential. That night, the saloon filled again. Cowboys came to drink, to complain about cattle prices and dry creek beds. I stayed behind the bar, polishing glasses and pretending not to notice when they stared too long. But nothing felt the same. I kept looking toward the corner where Daniel had sat, hoping against hope that he'd walk through that door again. Then Buck showed up, the one from the other night, the one with wandering hands and whiskey breath. He leaned on the bar like we were old friends, too close, reeking of trail dust and sweat. "Shame your gentleman rode off," he said, grinning like a coyote. "City man with soft hands and a fast horse. Thought maybe you'd caught yourself a husband." The words hit like a slap. I turned to pour whiskey, fighting back tears. He wouldn't stop. "You know, you could do worse than me. Got steady work with the cattle outfit. A little spread up near Flagstaff. You and I could make something of it." His breath smelled like tobacco. Nothing like Daniel's clean scent, nor his gentle voice. "I'd rather marry a rattlesnake," I told him, and meant it. He chuckled, not offended. "Suit yourself, but don't expect many more fancy strangers to blow in with the dust, Rosa. Men like that don't come back to places like this." The truth of it cut deep. I didn't answer. I just touched my chemise, feeling the letter crinkle against my ribs. My only proof that I hadn't imagined it all. The fire came 3 nights later. I'd gone to bed early, too tired to listen to Pa's drunken ramblings, too heavy with thoughts I couldn't sort. The letter and sketch were still tucked against my heart, warm from my skin. My only comfort in a world that had gone cold again. I woke to smoke. Not thick yet, but there. A bitter taste in the air, a haze that shouldn't be there. Terror gripped me as I sat up. The hallway was darker than it should be, shadows dancing in the wrong places. Then shouting. A crash. The unmistakable sound of glass breaking. I ran, my heart thudding loud in my ears. Pounded on every door upstairs, screaming for folks to get up and get out. They stumbled into the hallway, confused, half-dressed, clutching boots and blankets. "Out the back way," I yelled. "Now." Most listened to me. Some grumbled. One woman cried, but they moved, and I felt a desperate relief that at least I could save them. Then I heard screaming from below. By the time I reached the main room, the bar was engulfed. The oil lamp had fallen. Whether by accident or Pa's fumbling hand, I'd never know. But the flames were eating the walls, and smoke hit like a fist. "Pa!" I screamed for him, my voice breaking. No answer. I searched the back room, the office, and even opened the rear door, thinking he might have stumbled outside. Nothing. The heat was growing unbearable, forcing me back. Windows exploded, forcing me out into the cool desert night, barefoot, apron pressed to my mouth. The last stop lit the darkness behind me like a funeral pyre, like the death of everything I'd ever known. Neighbors came with buckets and blankets, but it was too late. The roof collapsed just before dawn, and I collapsed with it, emotionally, if not physically. They pulled me onto the Hendersons' porch, wrapped in someone's coat, soot in my hair, and tears streaming down my face. Clutching the only things I'd saved, the letter, still sealed, still unread, and the sketch, the only pieces of Daniel I had left. They found Pa's body later that day, collapsed behind the bar where he'd tried to save his last bottle of good whiskey. I thought he'd made it out. Never thought to look where his bottles were kept. The place he always went when the world got too heavy to bear. I cried then. For Pa, for the saloon, for the girl I'd been before the fire, for the hope that had died in the flames. 2 months later, I was still at the Henderson ranch. I hadn't slept right since the fire. The bed Mrs. Henderson gave me was soft enough, the walls didn't creak, and the roof was solid. But nothing smelled like sage smoke and desert wind. Nothing felt like home. I wore mourning like I wore everything, quietly. I cooked when I couldn't think, mended when I didn't want to feel. Never cried where the Hendersons could see, and never opened that letter. It stayed against my heart, along with the sketch, unfolded many times, still unread. I'd run my thumb over the seal until the wax had worn smooth. You'll only regret opening it, I'd tell myself. What if he was just being kind? What if it's goodbye? What if it breaks what's left of your heart? The knock came on a clear afternoon when the desert stretched gold and endless to the horizon. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her sewing. Expecting someone? No. But my heart knew before my mind did. It started racing like a wild thing. When I opened the door, heat shimmered up from the ground, and through it, him. "Daniel," I whispered, his name falling from my lips like a prayer. He looked different, cleaner, yes, shaved, rested, dressed like a man with a purpose. But his eyes were still carrying that weight only guilt and longing can carve, still beautiful, still blue enough to stop my breath. "Rosa," he said, voice catching on my name like he'd been practicing it, like it meant everything. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. "I looked everywhere," he said, stepping closer. Rode back to the saloon. "It's gone." The words came out broken. "I know." His hand flexed at his side like he wanted to reach for me but wasn't sure he had the right. "You were gone too." I am. My breath caught at the sight of him, honest and solid and here. "I wrote," he said quietly. "After I left, I got it." My hand moved instinctively to my chest, where the letter had lived like a secret. "You didn't answer." I stepped onto the porch, and he followed. The letter pressed warm against my chest, where it had lived for months, like a secret I was afraid to learn. "Why?" he asked, and the hurt in his voice nearly undid me. "I was scared," I said, tears threatening, of what it might say, of what I'd feel if it didn't say what I hoped. I couldn't bear to lose you twice. "And if it does say what you hoped," I held it out to him with trembling hands. "Read it," he said, pushing it back toward me. "Right here, right now. Let me watch you read it." "I can't," I told him, looking down. I... Standing there while the desert wind stirred the dust around our feet, he broke the seal and showed me a sketch of me sleeping, hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. So detailed, so tender, it took my breath away. And beneath it, words in his careful script. "If I'm to be tied to anything in this world, let it be to the woman who made me want to stop running." He read the words quietly. When I saw through the tears that blurred my eyes, he had dropped to one knee in the dust. "Rosa," he said, and his voice shaking. I tried to leave, tried to convince myself that what I felt was just gratitude or loneliness or the magic of one perfect night, but I couldn't. I can't. You're in my blood now, in my dreams, in every sketch I draw and every breath I take. He reached into his coat and pulled out a ring, simple gold set with a small turquoise stone, blue as desert sky. "My grandmother's," he said. "The only thing I kept when I left Virginia. I've been carrying it for the past year, never knowing why. Now I know. It was waiting for you." I opened my mouth. Nothing came but a sob. He smiled gently, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. "Say yes, Rosa. Come with me. I've chosen the life I want. And it's not politics or city drawing rooms or what my family expected. It's you. It's us. It's building something real together." I should have said something proper, something worthy of the moment, but all I managed to choke out was, "Yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring on my finger like it had been waiting there all along, and then he was kissing me. His kisses, pouring months of longing and love into that single, perfect moment. He took me home. Not to Virginia, but to a ranch he'd bought in the high country north of Flagstaff. The house smelled like pine and fresh lumber and new beginnings. In the room that faced east toward the sunrise, he showed me his studio. The walls were covered with sketches of me, of the saloon, of the desert, of a life we could build together. The view from my window, lamplight flickering, my silhouette against the glass, made my knees go weak. "I drew you," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind, so I wouldn't forget what love felt like. I kept the letter, framed it beside the sketch. And some nights, when the wind comes down from the mountains just right, I can almost hear the old saloon breathing again. And I remember what it means to be found when you thought you were lost forever. Some stories find their endings not in grand ballrooms or crowded cities, but in the quiet space between two heartbeats, in the place where love chooses to stay instead of running. I hope you felt the desert wind at your back, and the warmth of a hand reaching through the dust. Until next time, thank you for listening to Timeless Tales by Anna.